Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to week number 4.
This episode
is 4.
Quattro?
This is Quattro. This is 4. This is our 4th episode already. It's crazy. Time is just flying by.
Good to see you guys again.
Yes,
we brought Kevin back. He didn't have a whole lot going on tonight, so we had a good success from last week. We had a great dialogue going on, so we thought let's have him come on tonight again to talk about some, because he's got a lot of experience in some of the stuff we're going to be talking about tonight. Which Zach, want to give us a little hint of what we're doing?
This episode we're going to break down to the best of our abilities different recovery programs and kind of what their differences are. So what is the difference between AA and NA? Or they're both considered to be 12-step programs. So what are the different nuances? And as far as 12-step programs go, are there other programs that we can kind of, or that we'll touch into? Because obviously 12 steps aren't the only way that people get sober. I mean, there's therapy, there's refuge recovery, there's smart recovery, there's all these other recovery programs. So we're going to kind of get into that and kind of break down what each one is, and maybe get into detail on some more than others, because I don't think we're all experts on all of them, but we'll try and educate. We'll try and educate the population to the best of our abilities. So that's kind of what we're going to do.
Excellent.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. So I want to just talk about my first experience with it, just because it's like so fresh in my mind. I went into rehab, and the first actual time I went to an AA meeting was the first night I got into rehab. Never been to AA. Always heard about it. You see it on movies, and it's not all this like glamorized whatever. Like I remember when I went in there, I had like zero expectations. I obviously was feeling very foggy from still withdrawing from alcohol and feeling really buzzed from my head, just really fuzzy. But I remember sitting down, and immediately when they start going to some of the serenity prayers, and I just was really like fascinated about like, what is the process? How do I do this? How does one feel comfortable? Because I felt so out of the loop, and people were like, it was like they have been doing it for years. I felt like I was like the idiot, and then they call you up and they're like, hey, this best person now is 24-hour chip and hug, and doing their thing. And I remember a few people when I was in rehab, they were like patting me on the back, like, Mike, that's you need to go up there. And I was like, what? What am I doing?
Go up and embarrass yourself in front of everyone.
And my reward is a coin. It just like, it was kind of different. But once I heard that first speaker, and my first rehab, only rehab, I'm not going back to rehab. But the first person that got up, because the AA meeting was around a campfire, and the guy looked at the campfire and he says, never in a million years would I have ever thought of being around a campfire sober and enjoying it. And that to me was like, it hit me so hard, because like I love the outdoors, I love camping, but like every time I associate campfire and camping, it's beer or alcohol or getting just wasted around the camping.
Sure,
that's how I was too.
And seeing him say that like so vulnerable, I was just like, okay, I started seeing the bigger picture of it, and it really made me feel like, okay, like I'm not alone. This clearly is bigger than over my head, and I really just love the vibe of like, everyone is trying to become better. We all realize we have an issue. We're here for the same purpose, and there's zero judgment. And that was new to me, really new. And I liked the process. So, I mean, that was really my first experience with AA.
My first experience was a little bit nerve-wracking, just because I was uncomfortable going, as I think I mentioned before in the previous podcast. But I had also heard a few different people say that AA was a cult. And so I kind of went into it with that in the back of my mind.
Like halfway sitting on the chair ready to run away.
Exactly. And there's like some some programs, mention the concept of God, and I'm sure you guys will touch on that at some point. But and then there's other recovery programs that don't even use that particular concept, like refuge, like you were talking about earlier, and I'm sure you'll address. But I was happy to find out after a couple of meetings that they are certainly not a cult, and they're just people trying to recover, and just like in every other meeting you go to. So
I love the fact that you brought up the cult stigma that it has, because when my first run-in with a 12-step meeting was actually NA and not AA, and it was a very young crowd. Everybody was in a treatment center from somewhere, because I was in treatment in Taos, New Mexico, and it's a huge treatment town. I mean, there's like 7 treatment centers. So when we went to initially when I walked into NA, I had no idea that it was real, that people would sit around in a circle and say, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I am an alcoholic."
Yeah, it was like Fight Club.
I thought that was a Hollywood thing.
No, I
and I laughed at it. I was like, "Who the fuck?"
Yeah.
It was, but as I'm laughing, everybody's giving me this weird look. I'm like, "Oh my god, what did I get myself into?" Mm-hmm. And then when I went to AA in Taos, New Mexico, I think it's on Sunday nights. I can't remember. It's been a while. They have a candlelight meeting, and candlelight meetings is they turn all the lights out and everybody sits in a circle around these candles that just lights the room. And there's actually a psychological reason behind it, which is people open up in less light. And so it does have almost a therapeutic value. But when you're 22 years old, coming off of, a God knows how many year drug binge, and they walk you into this adobe church with all these old men from New Mexico, and half of them, I bet there was maybe half a dozen old men in there, and the number of teeth that they had, I could count on 2 hands, which was terrifying. And so we walk in, and the lights are on, and I'm like, okay, this is not bad. I didn't know it was a candlelight meeting. I had no idea. And then they hit the lights, and they had us say the Serenity Prayer, which I had never heard of in my entire life until I walked into that 12-step meeting, or that AA meeting. And they're all circled around these candles, God, grant us the serenity. It was terrifying.
I would have went cult.
Yeah, I did. I was legitimately. I was waiting for them to pull the chicken out and chop its head off, or some. We are sacrificing this to the alcoholic gods. That's what I thought it was, and so. Thank God they made me go back, because on my own I would have never gone back to that. I don't even think I would have stuck around if I was on my own. There'd have been no way. And the funny part, though, that I'm just going to throw in there is I went back there just this last winter to that same exact meeting. It was the first AA meeting that I'd ever gone to. And I walk into that meeting, and there's only maybe 4 or 5 people in there. That's about it, other than the person that I came with. And I start joking about that. I tell them that exact same story. And they all just looked at me with these blank looks on their face. They didn't even laugh at it, which is even more terrifying. Right. If somebody would have shared that story when I was in there and nobody laughed or moved, I would have been out the fucking door ASAP. So that was actually my very first experience. Was I really did think it was a cult. I thought it was a Hollywood thing. I didn't think that was people really sit in a group and address themselves by their first name. I mean, what is this third party? This third person shit.
Well, a lot of people can associate it with a negative. My parents never having drugs or alcohol issues ever. My mom's sister had some issues, and she didn't have a driver's license, so my parents would actually take her to AA a long time ago, and she would end up hooking up with people or going on dates with people, and it would end up being really bad, because it's people have 2-3 weeks of sobriety, and then they're connecting together, and they're okay, here we go. So my parents always associate it with just a kind of a negative of like, I don't see the benefit of it. You know, I don't see the true help. So when I went, and I kind of had that mindset a little bit, not really knowing what it was. And when I went, when I was in the psych ward for that weekend, my wife actually got picked up from one of her friends, and they went to an AA meeting together. And my wife came and she told me about it. She was like, man, it was crazy. She's like, the people that you would never associate really yourself a lot of the times in a normal day-to-day, or like crossing paths in a mall or whatever. She was like, those people came up and would just embrace you and just be like, how are you? And like, just real authentic, we are trying in our life. And like, it was, she was telling me about it, and I still didn't even believe her until, you know, a month later, until when I went to rehab and kind of realized I had an issue. But
Right.
it's, you know, an AA can get that way. I think if you don't have the right mindset going into it, and you jump into something like a relationship where you see somebody like that, I think you might be doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Red flag.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think people, sticking with AA right now, one of the things that I think people get really caught up in is the word alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
The whole reason that I attend the number of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings that I do is because, and if you listen to episode 1, I know it's long, it's like really long, we let it go way too long. But I talk about how I had a really bad meth addiction. Drinking was, I thought was sober. So when I got into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I thought, well, I'm not.
Tell that story, because that's just hysterical.
I know, it's funny. But the Alcoholics Anonymous, so I thought, well, I'm not an alcoholic, so I don't have a problem with that, right? So then this doesn't apply to me. And they even suggest, which I do, is they suggest that you address yourself as an alcoholic, as an addict, because it separates, you know, people. I'm about to spill a drink. I've almost done that like 3 times now. Because they make you they ask you to address yourself as an alcoholic, because it keeps everybody on the same playing field.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there's this stigma that I can't be an addict and go to an Alcoholics Anonymous
Mm-hmm.
meeting, and I can't be I can't be an overeater, or I can't have a problem with anything else, because this is for alcoholics only. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
So, like, I thought that was interesting, and being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I also had a cross addiction of drugs, and this, especially in this, I want to say in this day and age, it comes up a lot. You very, very rarely meet an alcoholic who is not also a drug addict, one of the things that comes up constantly is, you know, like your dilemma. You know, I have a problem with this drug and not alcohol, you know, and things like that. And what a lot of people don't realize is that alcohol is a drug. And for some reason, they get this mindset that alcohol is something completely different than a drug. And if you play that game, and I call it a game because that's exactly what it is. It's a mental game that you're not addicted to a drug if you're an alcoholic, and people use that excuse all the time. Like they'll come in with an alcohol problem, and they'll kick their alcohol problem, and then they'll use drugs and say, "Well, I didn't relapse because it wasn't alcohol." It's kind of, yeah. And then they find themselves drinking all over again because that's where the drugs led them, is back to alcohol. And we see this come up in meetings all the time. So, but you also come in with these diehards that only have an alcohol addiction and say they may use other drugs, but it's not their ass kicker. So, so they simply, especially a lot of the, what I've, in my experience, what I found with is a lot of the older generations, will come in and they'll be upset when a heroin addict starts to speak up and starts to tell his story. And they're like, well, I can't relate to a heroin addict's story when I'm an alcoholic. And, you know, this is only my opinion, and my opinion, you know, only matters to me, but it's the same story. Just, it's a different.
No, I think
I always say it's the same chains
Yeah.
with different hooks.
No, I think it is. I think everyone, obviously, if you have had addiction issues, you are constantly looking for loopholes to get yourself into.
That's exactly what
you
you're
know,
doing.
that's what you're looking
It's
for.
a mental mind game.
Yeah, it's like a mental gymnastics where you're like, okay, well, check this off, but yeah, okay, let's do that.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
but from my experience, I think that the vibe is a little bit different from because we went to some CA meetings, NA meetings, AA meetings.
CDA.
Yeah, we went to we went to a bunch of them, and I felt like the vibe, the whole purpose of all of them, obviously, I felt like it was a positive thing. I went to one CA
100%.
meeting where I did not feel like it was. I didn't learn anything. I just I got up and laughed because it was just
Which one was that?
CA.
Oh, okay.
It was just weird.
Sure.
To me. Not
They get
not
wild.
generalizing like the actual CA, but it was just the specific CA meeting I went into. It was a little bit bizarre. I mean, the guy was getting into this moral battle of women and stuff, and it just totally is well, because there's a loophole. He says, well, you know, I want to hook up with a girl, but I can't do that if I'm on cocaine, so I'm not doing cocaine so I can hook up with a girl. It was just it was annoying to listen to for him for 15 minutes. I was okay, we get it. You want to hook up with a girl.
That's funny.
I think the problem with AA, and for whoever, it's not a problem with AA. I think it's a problem with understanding AA and new people in recovery is because rarely, it's exactly what you said, rarely do you meet an alcoholic that doesn't have some type of drug problem.
Right.
Whether it's a prescription drug problem or an illegal drug problem or anything else, and it might not even be a drug problem, they may be overdoing it in other things as well.
Sure.
I mean, for instance, we were talking 2 weeks ago, Mike was talking about how once he quit drinking, he just gave everything into writing, right? Everything into writing. And then once the writing died down, the pig drinking started again. So it's not, I mean, everybody has this almost co-addictive pattern because it's not the chemical, it's the behavior behind it.
Sure.
But the problem that people have is like what we were saying is they get into this alcohol and then, oh no, alcohol, I don't have an alcohol problem, but AA meetings are everywhere. I mean, they are the most common meeting that you can find. 12-step meeting that you can find is an AA meeting. But it created this debacle in these meetings of we're different, you know, like the old timers. Because back when AA was first developed, drugs weren't really a thing. They were, but they weren't really talked about, I guess.
Right.
And it was ongoing, you know, change, new
and
discoveries
progression.
of whatever, you
And
know.
I want to point out that in the hometown that I grew up in, there was one NA Narcotics Anonymous meeting, which I'm about to push this into. One Narcotics Anonymous meeting a week versus that had maybe 3 people in it, versus 7 meetings a week, one every single night that had at least half a dozen people in it, and it was AA. And so I think this will now kind of I'll try and push it into to our next 12 step, which is like NA and other programs. But for anybody who's listening and all you have is AA meetings, fucking go to them.
Absolutely.
Go to them. It doesn't matter if you're addicted to snorting pixie sticks. Go to them because it's the same message, just in a different context.
Right.
Well, on top of that too, it's crazy to me of the area where I grew up in and not being aware of my surroundings of how easily accessible they are to go to, and how close they really were to my house. Like when I got out of rehab, I was like, okay, there's actually a rehab center that's a mile from my home. I had no idea. They have AA every single Sunday night, and then even when I was in rehab, which was about 20 miles away from my house, I started noticing, because I grew up in the area, and just driving around in the the druggy buggy or the van,
The dope fiend
the
limousine.
Klana van.
Yeah.
We had all these names for it, but like you start driving around, you start noticing all the buildings that like we're going into, and you're like, I went to college here, and we're going to this building here, and it's like they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's crazy of how big the community really is. So I do recommend what Zach says is go to them.
Well, from what I understand, most, if not all, current 12-step programs, whether it be CDA or NA or SA or all the other A's, stem from AA. Like AA was like the founder of the 12-step program. So when all these other people, started coming in, they started seeing alcoholics actually get well for the first time as a cultural sort of movement towards recovery instead of damnation, as far as the alcoholism goes. People with these other addictions started saying, I have a problem with this drug or with this sex problem or this kind of thing. Can we use your 12 steps? And AA was like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's 12 steps of common sense is really what it is.
Well, I think it helps you to kind of like really putting the brakes on your life and taking kind of the moral inventory of yourself. Of
Sure.
Where am I? What do I want? Where am I going? And who's going to help me get there?
Right.
And how am I going to help other people eventually get there too, to kind of keep the torch lit?
Right.
It's
And-
really exactly, and it goes to almost you got to push past these superficial barriers of the difference in the chemicals. It's not about the chemical, it's about the behavior.
Right.
And you gotta push through that, and how much motivation you have to get beyond what do they say, principles before personality.
Right.
Sure.
So as far as AA goes, and like what you were saying, it branches out into different 12-step programs. There are so many others that also people are unaware. I didn't know. So Narcotics Anonymous, I think, is number 2. It's the second biggest one. That's, I think, global as well. It is global because I'm moving to London, and I already know that there's several meetings in the area that I'm going to be in. Kevin, you go to CDA on Thursdays.
CDA. So
Right.
yeah. So I'm one of those people that went to AA to get sober. That's the route that I took. That's the route that I was introduced to, and it worked. So I stuck with that. But I am also one of those people that found the loophole. Wait, I can go out on these pills and it'll be fine because that's perfectly legal. Right, oh my gosh, the way you think when you're an addict. But that's okay, and I don't have to be accountable for it because it's not a bottle of alcohol. And so I went back to drugs, and that didn't work out so well for me.
Shocker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it turned out kind
It's
of
like,
to be
here we go again.
the same thing. I just went in a big loop. Maybe that's the loophole. I just wrote around the outside of it. And a friend of mine told me about this thing called CDA, and I'm like, what is CDA? What is that about? And it's actually stands for Chemical Dependency Anonymous. So I went there and I sat down, and lo and behold, it completely ran like an AA meeting. CDA has it has the exact same steps as AA, and they have their own book, big book, so to speak. But it says right in the front of it, it acknowledges AA. They say thank you to AA for letting us use their book, and
Kind of a guideline.
Yeah, as a guideline. And what they ended up doing is they got rid of the dilemma that AA has. They recognize this is a big problem. Heroin addicts and meth addicts and all these other different kind of drug addicts that were coming to AA were feeling like they were being shunned by the AA puritists, saying this is for alcoholics only, and they took the AA book itself and they rewrote it and updated the language that's being used in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous into a more modern version that they felt represented addicts in a whole. And so their motto is they do not use any kind of mind-altering substances of any kind. So there's no loophole.
Yeah, it's setting the standard high.
Right. It's setting the standard really high. So you can't say, well, I'm a heroin addict, but, pot would be fine. Mm-hmm. So they just get rid of that dilemma altogether. So anybody is welcome. You can go to CDA and say, I'm an alcoholic. You can go to CDA and say, I'm a meth addict. You can go to CDA and say, I'm a heroin addict. And everybody just welcomes you and wants to hear your story of recovery. That's what you're there for. It just completely gets rid of the argument altogether. So I found it most helpful for me. I still attend AA meetings just as often. And I go to CDA meetings also, because I also have that other part of me. So, that's what that's about.
See, because I have a friend that I was in IOP with, and he never, still to this day, has not been to an AA meeting, and he just won't do it. He just says, I don't want to go there and hear like the sad war story of whatever. And I feel like to each their own, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think
absolutely.
And for him saying that so bold when we were in IOP, and like the therapists were like, what? and he was just like, it just doesn't work for me. And he's like, I just don't want to do that. He's like, I'd rather go out and do something more active, to work out. And so he goes to this CrossFit gym that they work out, and then they talk about it kind of in a smaller version of not opening it up into like a real meeting.
Sure.
There's stuff out there like that all the time, that fixes and fits for different people.
Sure. So I hear that a lot. People will ask me about recovery, especially if they find out I'm in recovery. I don't run around like telling people I'm in recovery, but like word gets out, and I certainly don't try to hide it. Mm-hmm. If the subject comes up, I'll freely talk about it. But people will say, "Oh, you're in AA. That means like you think only AA works, and you have to go to AA and recover and things like that." And I have to admit, when I was when I first started going, I think I was a little more what's the word for it? Anyway, I kind of started thinking that, like I felt like a convert to AA or something, like, oh, AA works and it's, everybody should go to AA. But as time went on, it doesn't work for everybody. Mm-hmm. Some people don't like the atmosphere. Some people don't like that kind of societal structure of AA. And we were talking about it earlier that even in the AA book itself, it explains that they don't hold the monopoly on recovery. Mm-hmm. And I tell people who are, vehemently against going to AA meetings that they, and they're like, I can find recovery somewhere else, I'm sure of it. And please do.
Yeah, find something.
Yeah, please do. If you can find recovery in a flower, pursue that.
Sure. Just don't get a DUI.
Right.
I think something that I notice, especially working with people in early recovery, is their immediate. And actually, last week, Kevin, you talked about kind of your immediate gut instinct of there's no fucking way I'm going to AA. There's no way I'm not doing that.
Right.
And several people do that. And it's not. The thing that is concerning, and it's also what you shared last week, towards the end of it, is having the willingness to look at it and give it an honest try.
Sure.
Whether or not it's your thing, or any program, it really doesn't matter. But that attitude of indifference and intolerance is honestly what sends a lot of people out. because they say, I'm different, I'm better than that, I don't need that, or that's just immediately that's not going to work for me. Well, how the fuck do you know? Because you've done it.
Right. It's like
you don't know. No one knows.
Sure.
But as it comes down to it, that's also, and there is that almost stigma to it with people that are in AA or NA or CA or whatever works for them. They're an advocate of it, and you know that's the only way. Well, that's not the only way. And I think you're completely right.
On a level of like, I don't know how deep we want to go into kind of like of a higher power or kind of more of a spirituality realm.
Oh God, he's getting into God
I know,
concept. Here we go.
Everyone hold on to hold on to the table.
Here we go. And we just lost half our listeners.
Hang on. I just put my seatbelt on. Zach just put his water up. But on a like a level of that, of a kind of higher power, there has been times where I have said something or I have heard something, and I've gone up to somebody after and been like, I needed that. I needed to hear what you had to say.
Right.
So however the universe, however you want to believe it, that you lined up at the same place that I lined up, and we're here at the same place. However you want to define that as your spirituality or God. I don't know how you want to, but for me, I feel like there is some of that level of that it is really helpful. Like I spoke one time and talked about like having a young family and how hard it is and having little kids running around and just kind of the stress and life of that. And there was like literally a mom on the second row, and she was like bawling, and she was in rehab at the time, and she was like, I have two children as well. And she came up to me after and she was like, I just feel like I am not alone. I needed to hear what you had to say. And I was just like, well, I'm not like, well, thank you, I'm so great. But I feel like the unity and the real purpose of that is that kind of that camaraderie of like togetherness. We can do this. You're not alone. Your story is similar than mine. And I feel like that's such it's not rare. It's definitely not rare of how many people can say, I can relate to you, you can relate to me.
Exactly.
Right. And you hit the nail on the head on the God concept. One of the things that the 12-step programs, and they're not all 12-step programs. There's many others.
Yeah, we'll get into them.
And but one of the things that
the 12-step program.
Right. One of the things that the 12-step programs have in common that I found is there's always that God concept within the 12 steps. And that makes a lot of people shy away. Most people that I've encountered anyway in addiction, that have had a problem with addiction, have a lot of animosity towards the entire God concept. And I think that one of the things that helped me by going to different 12-step programs, like sort of spreading my wings, so to speak, and trying out things like CDA and NA and trying to find my fit and where I fit in those different kinds of meetings, is that I can have my own concept, God concept. I do not have to
like abide by someone else's standard.
Exactly. I don't have to have that same concept of the God that I was raised with. Who knew that God could be anybody?
It could be a rock. It could be a tree.
It could be a rock, and to many people, it is a rock, and it is a tree.
Right, and that's quite freeing. It's not only freeing for me, but it's freeing about how I can relate to other people's stories and be able to just say, oh, well, that's their version of their higher power, and still be able and not just write them off as some kind of God fanatic, or I can actually listen to the depth of their story, regardless of what their version of their higher power is.
One of the things that I think is the God concept in general gets, I would say, 8 out of 10 people. Because a lot of people have a lot of shame and they have a lot of anger towards whatever God it is that they were either raised in or that they believe in. And when somebody told me, hey, you get to pick your higher power, the first thing that went through my head is, fuck you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm serious because I did not believe that it didn't even register in my head that that was an option. When you're raised with there's Catholicism, there's Baptist, I mean any form of Christianity, then you can get into Hinduism and Buddhism and all these other religions that are out there. But fundamentally, somebody came up with that idea.
Right.
And it took me to this act of serious desperation to where I picked a crossbeam that was holding up the ceiling. Oh, it's power greater than myself. Screw you guys, I found a higher power. To find, or to ultimately give up. But the AA, or I guess just the 12 steps in general, it's not just AA. I would attribute it to the 12 steps. Solved a problem that for centuries millions of people would fight over. Christianity, the Crusades, all the way through. There's so many historical incidences where religion has ended up causing wars and causing mass amounts of death.
Sure. When
in reality, here we have at this moment a way that we can pick our own God or our own higher power. God has such a taboo to it.
Well, if you look at religion as a whole, not to dive into straight religion, but those religions, they have to meet and fit the masses. They have to fit the person, the chunk of chunk of the people. You don't see it in a Catholic church or a Mormon church or a Jewish church. You're hey, everybody up at the pulpit say, hey, you should go worship your own God. You should figure it out for yourself. It'd just be too hard to do that. You lose a lot of people. People like structure. People like to be told what to do. It's a lot harder to just dive into it and find your own thing that works for you.
Sure.
And it's hard. I remember the first week when I was in rehab, I was laying on my back, getting ready to wait for the yoga instructor to come in. And I was just depressed. I was I should be home with my wife. I should be home with my kids. I should be what is wrong with me? I'm failing as a husband. My work needs me. And I remember just laying there and taking a couple deep breaths. And the sun came in through the window and it just it was on my face. And it just warmed my face up. And I just started tears coming down my face a little bit, trying to hide it a little bit because I was kind of over in the corner. And I just felt that is me. That's working for me as my higher power. It's the warmth of the sun was gravitating me to feel Michael, what you're doing is your betterness, I can't even say it.
Bettering yourself?
Yeah, there you go. Bettering yourself.
There you go.
You're doing something good. And it was the first time in a long time where I actually felt something else besides alcohol just ruining my life. It was, you are doing what is working for you. And who gives a shit? Who gives a shit about anybody else of what their thought is? Do what you're doing now.
Right.
It was powerful. It was really, being raised in a really structured religion. It was the first time in a very, very long time I felt something like that.
So can you relate to my concept of that God shot that they call it? You'll hear that if you go to 12-step meetings. You'll hear the words God shot, and you're what the hell are you talking about? Mm-hmm. But I equate it to having a clear thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're so rare. It's
a
religious experience.
It is, and it sounds
those aha moments.
Yeah, but it sounds silly for somebody, and I could care less what they say. They're oh, okay, Mike, that's just sun on your face. Just go outside. You can get that any day you want to, but that could, for them, sure, they can think that of me. I don't really care.
But
they
it's
probably
almost,
have their own thing.
Those experiences have to line up at the right time, though, right? So 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the moment that you had that experience, it wouldn't have done the same. You could walk outside and you're it's hot out here,
right?
And then walk back inside, or I'm gonna get a sunburn, and walk back inside. But it's also the timing and what Kevin said, and you actually talked about it last week as well. The clear thought that becomes the spiritual experience that is then attributed to a higher power, higher thought.
Right.
Right.
It's not necessarily, oh, I got into the sun. It's skeptics,
Yeah, it's-
and there's going to be those skeptics that
Yeah.
are going to say that shit, and well, they're going to find their own, higher power or deity or whatever it may be.
Right. Right.
And I think it varies for people. I've had different experiences like that where it's like, okay, obviously it feels right inside, and what I'm doing is progressing. I'm better. I keep screwing myself up.
Bettering yourself.
Bettering myself. Sounds like I'm buttering myself. Buttering a piece of toast or something.
So, as far as we don't want to dive too much into this. We've already spent 40 minutes on AA and NA and 12-step programs. So there's other programs out there.
Let's talk about Refuge
Let's talk about Refuge.
before it gets
before we run out.
Jump into it. I didn't mean to cut you off. But
No, you're fine. I was just about to say we need to get into something else. Refuge recovery. That is for the. Do you guys know what Refuge is?
It's a Buddhist. It's from my understanding of it, and I actually had the opportunity to go to a few refuge recovery meetings, and I had never heard of it before. Well, why would I have? But throughout
You're
recovery,
all shocked.
Yeah, throughout recovery, I've had the opportunity to go to quite a few meetings. Like I said last week, I work in recovery, so I get to see all of these different avenues of recovery. And I went to a refuge recovery meeting. It's the Buddhist version of a 12-step program. And from my understanding, Buddhists don't necessarily have a divine, godlike power in their philosophical. I'm not sure that I really want to call it a religion, although, to the listeners, I'm ignorant on the subject, and I apologize for that. But it's like a
Philosophy.
a philosophy,
Yeah.
but set up kind of in a religious way, I suppose, from a religious person's point of view. Although I'm not religious at all. But
Come on, Kevin. Quit beating yourself up.
okay,
Yeah, spiritual. There you
right,
go.
a spiritual point of view, and it was really neat. It was very meditative. People talked. It ran very similar to a 12-step meeting. People talked and shared about the recovery in the same way. You just didn't hear the word. Really, what I noticed about it is I didn't hear the word God, the actual word God, coming up over and over and over again.
What about higher power? Did you hear anything about higher power either? They kind of it almost removed. They almost removed that aspect of it.
Well, from what I got out of it, it was like finding the higher power in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was a really neat point of view.
The one thing I like about it is that you can bring it home. You can self-do it. I had a little small refuge thing I did with my wife because she was asking all these questions. I got home from rehab and I was like, "Do you want to do a little refuge recovery?" She's like, "What?" And I was just I pulled up the book and started reading through a lot of it with our eyes are closed, and we're talking about just our mind and being aware of your body, of releasing your stomach and the stresses, and calming yourself, and breathing and deep breathing and counting those breaths. And it was my wife and I, we were both just really calm after. It just really makes you so aware of your body, of all of that. And doing that when I was in rehab, we do refuge recovery on Tuesday nights, something like that. Tuesday or
yeah, we were
Thursdays.
doing it on Tuesdays.
Let's just say Tuesday. and we would do it. It was amazing to just lay there and hearing the music and just calm, and how we did it. It was very empowering to me. Yeah, it was peaceful.
Yeah, very peaceful. So
Zen,
But to me, towards the end of it, if I had to sort of wrap it up, it was the same recovery message with a different modality.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which speaks volumes to some people.
it does. If some people are just really against the whole God concept. I grew up from when I was very young until I was a teenager in an extremely religious family. I call it sort of dysfunctionally religious. Oh no, my mom's gonna hear this. But
I doubt your mom's gonna listen to
yeah,
this.
you're right. Just won't tell her about it. Anyway, so I was a little bit familiar with the structure of how like a God concept like worked, I guess, even though I ended up taking it all apart and restructuring it for myself after the fact, after I got sober and put it together on what works for me. But for somebody that's not familiar with that and the concept of God seems extremely foreign and maybe even offensive, refuge works really well.
Yeah. With a lot of people with the mindset of, God did this to me. Why does bad things happen to good people? Why am I put in this position?
Right.
It really helps to kind of, in my opinion, helps you become mindful and aware of not only yourself, but the people and your surroundings that are around you of there is an easy way just to slow down. And I read this statistic, not jumping ships into mindfulness, but it kind of goes parallel with this. I read this from this doctor saying if you can start teaching your children really young to be aware of how they're feeling and with the mindfulness, they can start to develop how they're feeling and they approach you of how they're feeling. I don't feel very good right now. And like my little 3-year-old right now, it's nuts. I look at him and you can tell he's stressed out. I'm like, hey buddy. And then all of a sudden he looks at me and he goes, and he takes a deep breath. And I'm just like, wow, and then he's
that
like,
is
then
so
he goes,
smart.
That kid is woke.
Yeah, he is. And he looks at me and goes, Dad, I feel so much better now. And I'm just like, wow, because if you can do that,
Sure.
you become aware of yourself. You don't look for that pattern of saying, I feel like shit, I'm going to go abuse some drugs and alcohol right now.
Right.
It's, I feel like shit, what do I do at this point?
Some of the things that are different in refuge recovery are, for one, it is not a 12-step program. They actually believe in a couple other things. So they have the 4 truths of refuge recovery, which is 1, addiction creates suffering.
Wow.
Ding, 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 ding.
Right.
No brainer. I just want to throw that out there. 2, the cause of addiction is repetitive craving. Also, no brainer. 3, recovery is possible. And 4, the path to recovery is available. I think that's very...
All good.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, very self-explanatory. It also does get into a lot of mindfulness, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is body and breath, your feelings, your state of mind, and your mindfulness of mind objects, which it just says in parentheses, truth. I don't quite know what that means. And then it also gets into the 8-fold path to recovery. So instead of 12 steps, they have 8 steps. And I'm not going to get into all 8 of them because we would be here all day. Or we just spend another... We just create another... Yeah, we just create another hour. Yeah, another 2 hours of podcast. But it's really... It goes from understanding to intention to communication and so it's basically understanding that there's a problem, having an intention to fix that problem. Communication and community, so reaching out and finding a community, and then action, livelihood and service, and then keeping that effort, and then 7, which is mindfulness, which is very much like steps 10 and 11.
Sure.
And it's what mindfulness, being consistently mindful, and then concentration and meditations. I'm not 100% on that, but there's actually a website. I stole all of this from refugerecovery.org. So if you're interested in it, check it out. It's all online.
What I think is cool about recovery in general is that you find that most of these meetings you can easily move in and out of all of them because they all have the exact same message.
Yeah, if your mind is open enough to take in the messages, a lot of people they shut their minds off. I had a client, I guess, at work that he was born and bred Christian, and when he went into treatment, he had his Bible by his side, and God was going to save him. And which, I mean, more power to him. If that works for you, that works for you.
Sure.
However, there's that story of there's a flood and you're on your roof, right? And you're saying to yourself, God's going to save me, God's going to save me. Well, a boat comes by and says, hey, do you need help? And you say, no, God's going to save me. And then a helicopter flies by and says, hey, do you need help? We'll rescue you. And you say, no, God's going to come save me. And then you drown, and then you get to, heaven or wherever you go, and you look at God and you say, why didn't you save me? And God says, I did. I sent you a boat and a helicopter.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, it's all the same if your mind is open enough to take it in. And this hardcore Christian guy, he refused to go to refuge recovery because it was Buddhist and it was against his religion.
See, and both modalities, as far as like the God concept and refuge, have the same kind of, what I found had the same message, which I didn't expect, but it was the deflation of ego.
Yeah.
Get rid of, how you define yourself. Drop it.
Mm-hmm.
Just completely drop it. It's literally one of the main messages that they teach is, let's get rid of the ego, and because it's usually your ego that's keeping you drunk,
Right.
or drugged up.
Well, even with refuge recovery as well, like if people are kind of like, well, they're hearing us talking about it and they're like, well, how do I, or whatever. I mean, they even offer, you can go buy the book. You could buy refuge recovery and do some of your own stuff, and then also they have. I've been looking on my phone while you guys are talking. I was listening to you, but I was looking at this.
Okay.
As well. But it says that you actually can get like on online like groups where they actually do a refuge recovery, like a meeting, a group meeting online. Yeah,
That's cool.
which is kind of cool.
They do that with 12-step programs too.
Do they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So have you guys, we're going to move on because we're kind of running out of time. We spent a ton of time on 12 steps, but honestly, those 12-step groups that's the vast majority of the recovery community. They're going to be something 12-step based.
Sure.
But this next one that I want to focus on, have you guys heard of Smart Recovery?
I'm a little gray. I'm not gonna lie.
I've heard of it. It's more of like a cognitive sort of logic based.
So yeah, pretty close. So I've got their website up again. You can find all this information online. I literally pulled up tab after tab of each one we're talking about on their websites, and their mission says, their mission statement is to empower people to achieve independence from addiction problems with their science-based 4-point program. And they're in their about me section, it says Smart Recovery is an abstinence-based organization with a sensible self-help program for people having problems with drinking and using. It includes many ideas and techniques to help change your life from one that is self-destructive and unhappy to one that is constructive and satisfying. It is not a spin-off of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says that like its own sentence.
I'm reading it right now.
Oh yeah, there you go. No one will label you an alcoholic, an addict, or diseased, nor powerless, which is a big turnoff to a lot of people. It is a big, huge turnoff to a lot of people.
I had a problem with that, with just the concept of being called diseased.
Yeah, to be completely, it was like what we went back
or
to.
somebody saying, I'm always going to be sick. That one, I don't like hearing it. I still don't like hearing it.
Yeah.
Although,
or it's a choice.
oh yeah, that's.
I don't like the choice one either. That's a whole.
You have a
other-
choice.
Yeah,
Right?
you have a choice.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so no one will label you that, and if you do not believe in a religion or spirituality, that's fine too.
But it also says on here that they have an online message board that's available 24/7, which is cool. So like if you are middle of the night stuff, you can jump into that as well.
That's awesome.
And it also says that, I don't know, Zach, it says right here that it teaches you the self-empowerment and self-reliance as well.
So here's where I've kind of looked into this, and here's where I have a concern towards this one. is it really puts a lot of power on self. And a lot of people that get into recovery, that are in active addictions, well, their best thinking got them there. Their selves landed them in that situation, and no matter how much motivation they had, and no matter how much will they had, they couldn't stop, which is why they sought out help. So the only thing I guess that I have a concern about with that is in their 4 steps. Step 1 is enhancing motivation. It's like prison time wasn't enough motivation for me to I would still go back out. I would still drink and drive, and then refusing to act on urges to use. That's a lot easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in active addiction. And then managing life's problems in a sensible and effective way without substances. I think that's a good one. And developing a positive, balanced, and healthy lifestyle, which is everything that you could learn in another program as well. I would just be concerned as far as self-motivation goes, because what's more motivating than death?
Right.
And then people will still drink and use, knowing full well that this is probably gonna kill me.
Well, not only that, I mean, we all know that addicts and alcoholics or whatever, they are really, really good at deceiving people and deceiving our own selves as well. So the last one where it is 0.4 on Smart Recovery, where it's basically living a balanced life, I don't know how you really check in on that, because you could be completely not living a balanced life, but you're thinking you're living a balanced life. You're lying to everybody on the outside, making it look like you're doing good. But there's definitely I don't know. It's a lot easier said than done, I guess. It
is a lot easier said than done. However, I am not completely familiar with it. None of us really are. So if you're listening to this and you do know more about Smart Recovery, throw it up on our Instagram.
Yeah.
Because we'll post about this and let us know a little more about it.
Or some stories
of
a
natural
how it's
skeptic,
helped.
or how it's helped. It's relatively new, especially compared to AA and NA and those other big time 12-step programs. It's relatively new. Same with Refuge. Refuge is actually fairly new as well.
Right. I would tell people like I said a little bit before, whatever they're interested in, whatever modality that they decide to pursue sobriety, any reason or any way is good. If you can gain a month of sobriety and clear your mind a little bit, so that you can attain a place where you can branch out and find something in an intelligent, cognitive way or cogent way, anything is good. Any of those programs that you've mentioned so far. Don't you agree?
Yeah. For me, I really like going to AA meetings that have somebody who's prepared. I really like having a long open talk.
Sure.
Like a speaker kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like a format.
Mm-hmm. I like that, because it kind of preps the person, so they're not just coming up and you don't get the person a lot of times where they're like, I can't, if I didn't come today, then I don't know what I would have done. And they go into these war sad stories, which I don't mind hearing, but I really do. That's what's working and has worked for me, is I hear this story based of okay, and you hear it from start to finish, and it gives me the confidence in myself that I'm okay, I think I can relate, and it helps me kind of hear I'm more of a storyteller, I really like that part of it, but that's my jam.
I think really what it comes down to, so AA, I've noticed AA has an older crowd that's much more to the book. NA is a much younger crowd that's has a lot more, at least what I've seen, a lot more functions, at least in the area that we're in, has a lot more, they call it fellowshipping, where they have dinners and fundraisers and all that other stuff. Refuge is really small so far. I haven't really, and then of course we already discussed Smart Recovery, but I think it really comes down.
It might just be really small because of where we are too.
It could be
geographically.
100%.
Right.
But what I've noticed throughout all of them, no matter if it's Refuge or if it's Smart or whatever it may be, you get out what you put in.
Absolutely.
Right.
when I got into treatment, or actually when I got out of treatment, the first night that I did, I missed out on my little sister's birthday. After missing 4 months of my family life, I went to a meeting. Because the first thing that I put in front of my recovery is the second thing I'm going to lose. Mm-hmm. And so anybody, if you, whatever program you decide to follow, if you don't give it your all, then you can't expect everything that they're promising, right? If I'm not applying myself as much as I possibly can, then I better not get upset at the fact that, oh, I didn't get everything they told me I was going to get.
Right.
You know, like in AA, they have the 9th step promises. Mm-hmm. NA also has, I guess, kind of promises as well. And I'm sure other fellowships do. But you're not going to get it if you just go in there and half-ass it. You actually have to get up and do something because these programs require work. Kevin, when we're almost out of time, but when you did the 12 steps, when you went through the 12 steps, was it just one of those, oh, let's talk about it? And I mean, what's step 1? Oh, I'm powerless. Yeah, I can't drink. What's step 2? Oh, there's a higher power. Or did you actually have to write it down, read it, engage yourself in that process?
So I wish that was like a super simple answer to give you. The real answer is that I just didn't really do them. When I first got into recovery, I heard a lot of talk about 12 steps. I actually got a sponsor because that's what they told me to do. I read through the 12 steps and thought, wow, I can get these done in about 20 minutes. And that's the truth.
There was a guy that was in our IOP that he like literally read the 12 steps. And he's like, okay, let's look. Number 1 done, 2 done, 3 done, 4 done.
Right.
Like just like it was like that fast. And
right.
2 of the other people that we just got out of 30 day, and that person never did 30 days. So we were just like, oh my gosh.
Right. I remember I did my step 4. Which is in the AA program or in a 12-step program was like, you know, writing down like kind of my personal inventory, which is like my resentments and all these other things. You'd have to read the book to find out. And and I called my sponsor at the time and I said, hey, you know, I'm going to start writing this list. Will you listen to it so I can get my step 5 done, which is sharing it with someone else? And he said, yeah, absolutely. Like when you're done, like give me a call, you know, and maybe I can help you through it, like writing this stuff out and whatever. And I hung up the phone and about 6 or 7 minutes later, I called him back and said, hey, okay, I'm ready. Can I come over? and he was like, what? I don't think you fully understand.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I wrote everything out. It's like all done. I just want to come over and get this done. And I just wanted to get well.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be well. I want to not be an alcoholic anymore right now. Like by this afternoon, I want to, you know, kick the alcoholism thing.
Well, it's
so I can just move on with my life.
Exactly. I just want to.
The problem is that we all have the addiction personality where we're like, okay, I don't feel good. You drink and drug. You know?
Right.
So same thing.
I want immediate satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly. My therapist told me, I was like, I am so excited in a year from now, like 1 year from right now, that I will be sober. And he was like, Mike, that's really dangerous to be talking like a full year from now. You got to go one day at a time. Like don't overanalyze this thing.
Right. You're setting yourself up for
failure. Yeah. I mean, you just want a quick fix.
Right. But yeah, so I eventually, of course, you know, he wouldn't let me do my step 5, so I fired him immediately. and
You're fired.
Yeah, and went searching for another one, and it came slowly. Mm-hmm. You know, it came over time of understanding what the 12 steps are, and you know, they're more of a way of life, practicing these steps as a way of life, not something that you're going to work your way through in a day. You know,
but they require time and they require work, and that's with any program.
And it does. And what I was gonna say when I kept saying, you know, like about these different avenues, and you know, and any of them is going to be worthwhile, whether you buy into the actual program itself of wherever you're going to find your recovery. What I wanted to emphasize, what works for, or what I came to realize, is that by going to these meetings, even if these meetings sucked. Like I went in and it was a bunch of people doing like drunkalogs and
Right.
talking about like all these things they did when they were drunk, and because I want to go there and hear about like how are you staying sober,
Right.
not what it was like when you weren't sober, because that's where we all were. It's not necessarily always going to be what I get out of the meeting or what I put into the meeting. It's the fact that I took action and even went to a meeting at all.
Right.
It was the action that I took for myself to stay sober that day.
Yeah, you were there, and
Mm-hmm.
there's been a few times where I've had like a really bad day where I've gone to a meeting and I'm like, I just want to gain like maybe one thing out of this. Just try to look for one thing, and usually that I end up with like 10 or 20.
Right? Because you're right. It's just taking that action. But we are actually 5 minutes past time.
All right,
So-
we're not doing episode.
We're not
one.
doing. Yeah, we're not gonna pull off episode 1. I think really the moral. I mean, the gist of what I got out of this is there are so many avenues and routes that people can take for recovery, and as long as you apply yourself to it, whatever that route may be, and actually work through it, which is really hard for a lot of people. You can be successful. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be AA, it doesn't have to be refuge, it doesn't have to be whatever it may be.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to evolve it.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna close on. At least what I wanted to say was that don't be intimidated by it. I was extremely intimidated, like just thinking it was weird. And I feel like if you go in there, just open heart, open mind, I really feel like you could be setting yourself up for a pretty good future.
Absolutely.
Cool. Right on. Well, that is the end of episode 4.
And thanks, Kevin, for
And we want to thank
coming
Kevin
back out
for
again.
coming back, because
I like your words.
there was a lot of good insight. A lot of good insight that came from you. So
Yeah.
good shit.
A lot of
Nice.
knowledge, so
You
I
guys are so
appreciate that.
kind.
Yeah. So all right, we will catch everybody next week.
And the last thing is, we'll post some of the stuff on our Instagram if you are curious about like some of the guidelines of AA and NA. I can put all that on Instagram so people
Yeah,
have ideas.
that'd be
And-
awesome.
And there's also apps on your phone that you can find rooms to go into. There's a bunch of them. They're everywhere. You'd
It'd
be
be
really
interesting
surprised.
to hear like avenues that we didn't mention.
Yeah,
I know.
If you know something, send us a message on Instagram or post comment on our posts, anything like that, and
we'll tap into that.
yeah, absolutely. Because we don't know everything, that's for goddamn sure.
No.
We got our own
We're
meaningless
trying.
podcast.
Right.
All right. Okay. Until next time.